All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to try to record a video here. The dogs keep pestering me, so basically they ruined the last one. So I was already planning on making this video, but then I watched the latest Comeback Kids news, and guy on there basically said, I forget his name, basically said that he's hoping that the new PvP gear in Season of Discovery will fix some of the bursty PvP issues in Season of Discovery. And I was like, hold my beer on that one because the answer is going to be hell no, it's not going to fix anything. But I was planning on making a video as to exactly, so we could pin down exactly what the problem in SoD PvP is at like the 40,000 foot level. And from what I can see, the major issue is I'm going to try to make in this video where I'm going to TLDR at the beginning and then I'm going to proof it at the later end. But just know that I do not do TLDRs very well. My TLDRs are like 20 minutes. It's just how my brain works. It is what it is. But the two major issues that I think are existing in Season of Discovery are they've been handing out hard-hitting instant cast spells to basically every class in the game. Literally every class in the game has a hard-hitting instant, a long range, a hard-hitting instant cast spell available to them now. This includes rogues, which fascinatingly involves them vanishing and then shadow stepping on top of you, so they don't throw a long range or a ranged instant cast spell at you. They literally throw a rogue at you, which is basically the same thing. I thought that was amusing when I started looking at this stuff. The other problem is that it's not just hard-hitting instant cast spells that exist in the game. It's the fact that they're long-range hard-hitting instant cast spells in the game. They're like 30-yard range. This is stuff that does not exist in classic World of Warcraft at all, and for very, very good reason. So if we look at the instant cast spells that exist in like era, like classic vanilla, right? It's literally only Earth Shock on shamans, Fire Blast on mages, Moonfire if you want to count that in, even though it's kind of not. And then lastly, you have Arcane Shot. The only one of those that's even worth mentioning as a long-range, hard-hitting instant cast spell is actually Arcane Shot. Moonfire is basically too mana efficient to spam on most targets at range, and she's not super hard hitting. She like slowly tickles you to death. When you're spamming it, it just basically accelerates its dot effect, kind of a thing. So it doesn't really count as a long range, hard hitting spell whatsoever. Fire Blast is 20-yard range, 8-second cooldown, and she doesn't hit very hard at all. She'll be lucky if she takes out 11% of your life. Earth Shock is the only one here that really slaps, and she's on a 20-yard range, instant cast, and she does between like 800 to 1600 damage if she crits. When she doesn't crit, she tickles you. When she does crit, she bitch slaps you sideways, right? It's probably the hardest hitting class spell in the game. The only other one is Arcane Shot on Hunter. Arcane Shot on Hunter is the only example she's also on a 6-second cooldown, of a long-range, hard-hitting spell in classic World of Warcraft. Hunter also has other ones. I forget the name of it, but it involves like their ZG trinket. Like they can like multi-shot you, which is I think like an instant cast, like 30-yard range, and they'll use like their ZG trinket to arcane shot you and then to double tap you at range, which is pretty terrifying in era. It kind of deletes mages out of existence. But that's kind of the class identity of a hunter, is that they're supposed to be able to reach behind. They're supposed to be able to take on spellcasters at the 30-yard range mark and basically slap them around pretty hard. Like that's part of their class identity, whereas no other class can really do that. Okay, so the point is that in classic World of Warcraft, instant cast spells are super, super rare. Hard casting instant spells are even rarer. And long-range instant cast spells do not, hard-hitting instant cast spells simply do not exist in classic World of Warcraft, unless we're specifically talking about Hunter. And as we're going to see, this is for very, very good reasons. And then in Season of Discovery, they basically decided to give everyone hard-hitting instant cast spells, which my assessment is a mistake. And then they decided to give them long-range instant cast spells, which is way worse. So we're about to find out why. Okay, so that's the base premise. Now I'm going to move on to... We're still in the TLDR mode. I'm not really trying really hard to prove it. So the TLDR here is that if you're a frontliner, right? Like if you're a warrior and you charge into an enemy team, in classic World of Warcraft, the entire enemy team, let's say they're all spellcasters, would have to root themselves in place and start charging up, like, 2-second spellcasts. Be that, frost bolts, be that shadow bolts, be that lightning bolts or whatever, right? So everyone has to kind of stop and start casting spells, or they have to run over to this melee guy so they can start instant attacking him with melee attacks. But that's all that's really going on, right? Which means that when the warrior goes in, 2 seconds after he goes in, he's going to get smacked with some stuff. He's going to get smacked around pretty hard 2 seconds afterwards. And the healing spells are usually like 2.5 seconds, which means you can time them pretty good. So he'll take a lot of damage, and then like 0.5 seconds later, he's catching big boy heals. And so all our warrior hero has to do here is just survive the initial burst from the enemy team, and then it just becomes a game of HPS versus DPS and damage mitigation and yada, 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 right? So in Classic WoW, all he has to survive is a bunch of 2-second spellcasts, some melee hits, and a handful of instant cast spells that will tickle you, that are basically tickling him, all right? You follow me on this? In Season of Discovery, when half or more of the enemy team basically has Shadow Word Death or really hard instant cast spells, they get to do the Burst Wombo combo on you. They get to, hit you, charge up that Mind Blast, hit you with the Mind Blast, and then instantly Shadow Word Death you afterwards. Shamans are a good example of this in Classic WoW because they'll do a 2-second Lightning Bolt into you, followed immediately by an Earth Shock, and it really, really hurts. What this means is the amount of if you charge into like an enemy team of Shamans, the amount of damage that you have to survive in the burst is far in excess of what you'd normally have to survive. So if it was a bunch of priests under normal circumstances, it's just going to be a bunch of mind blasts, like 2 seconds or 1.5 seconds after the warrior charges in. In Season of Discovery, it's a bunch of mind blasts on top of Shadow Word Deaths within 1.5 seconds of going in, which it's causing the amount of burst damage that's flowing out of the enemy team to absolutely skyrocket. So this warrior used to have to survive, say, X amount of damage, and then now how much he has to survive is literally a mathematical equation, depending on, what am I trying to say here? Depending on literally 2 variables. Okay, variable 1 is how hard do these instant cast spells hit compared to the normal hard cast spell, right? So if the hard cast spell hits for 100 and these instant cast spells are hitting for 50, in Classic World of Warcraft, you'd only have to survive 100 damage incoming after 2 seconds of a spell cast. But in Season of Discovery, he'll have to survive 150 damage, right? Because it's going to be in the same space and time. Because it's going to be that hard cast spell into an instant cast spell, right? The instant cast spell is doing half the damage of the hard cast spell. So congratulations, we need a 50% increase on the amount of HP as a frontliner to be able to survive in this environment. In Season of Discovery, however, they've kind of buffed the selection of your first instant cast spells. So, for example, Shamans aren't doing Lightning Bolt anymore. They're doing Lava Burst, and Lava Burst is going to do 30% more damage than a Lightning Bolt. So you have to. So under normal if the instant cast spells didn't exist, it would go from doing 100 damage per spell cast to 130 spell damage per spell cast. So now I need 30% more HP. But unfortunately, both the instant cast spells and the raw damage increase of the first spell exist in Season of Discovery. So it's more like you need to increase it by 30%. Just because you're getting hit with something harder than normal in the first spell cast. And then these instant cast spells are hitting for like 80% of that, or like 70%, 80% of that same amount of damage. And you have to add those together. So what's happening here for our warrior hero in the front line is that he doesn't have to increase his HP effectively by 30%. He's having to increase it closer by like 200%. Which means the warrior goes in, and there's no healing, that which just explodes. All right? Okay, cool. So that's problem number one. That's like you're handing out instant cast spells to everyone and their dog. Don't be surprised if it's basically doubling up the amount of damage in a certain space of time, and greatly increasing the amount of HP frontliners need. Really, really bad. But let's look at it from a mage's perspective, which is not going to get any better. Okay, so from a mage perspective, right, he wants to go from being beyond 30 yards to sticking his dick inside of 30 yards so he can cast some spells. Lovely. He's a squishy backliner, though, right? The only way for him to really survive and to tank enemy damage and to be able to freely cast spells in the enemy team is to basically range tank people, right? He doesn't want to go into 20 yards, even in classic World of Warcraft, because there's instant cast spells and terrible, awful, no good things like 1.5 second Warlock Fear casts and a bunch of other nasty stuff that's going to come for him. He doesn't want to go anywhere near that. He wants to stay just ahead of 30 yards and start casting some damn frost bolts into the enemy. Well, in Classic WoW, the only class that can even remotely stop him from doing this without, charging past this warrior. And of course, if someone wants to advance past, run forward, the correct solution for the mage is just to run away. They can visually see it coming, and so there's some element of counterplay that they can engage in. But the only class in original Classic that would even remotely pop them in the back line would be a hunter, because the hunter actually has multiple long-range instant cast abilities, but they're specifically designed to be the nightmare fuel for clothies that want to sit at the 30-yard range mark in Classic WoW. In Season of Discovery, because there's so many long-range plus hard-hitting instant cast spells, the enemy team can literally decide they want to all throw shadow bolts at Shadow Word Deaths at this guy, and he'll just explode. And there's really not a damn thing he can do about it. Right? The warrior here, he's got 10,000, 13,000 HP when played properly in Classic World of Warcraft. You think I'm joking, but then you start looking at their PvP trinkets and all their buffs and the 30% HP bonus from Last Stand and all that stuff. They're designed to be able to take this like a champion. Warriors, paladins, of course, have bubble. That's how they deal with being a frontliner. What mages and everybody else are supposed to. Anyways, my point is that the instant cast spells reach out past the 20-yard range mark, and they literally delete enemy classes out of existence. The mechanics involved here are even worse, because they're instant cast spells. So it's not like all these priests, instantly casted a Shadow Bolt, and the Shadow Bolt is slowly making its way across the battlefield towards this mage. And this mage can go, oh, crap, are all 5 of those instant cast Shadow Bolts for me? I better, pop this PvP trinket, Shadow Reflector, for example. I know it won't reflect the damage, but I do believe it makes you immune to it, but I could be wrong about that. While the bolt's in the air, you pop Shadow Reflector, it won't reflect it back, but you're actually going to be immune to the Shadow Bolt when it finally hits you. Right? So there's no counterplay, no visual counterplay, no time to take a reaction. He can't ice block it or anything like that. They're all just instantly take damage now at the 30-yard range mark, fucking die. And so the mage just explodes. So what does this mage's life look like? Well, he tries to get forward, cast a spell, he explodes, he goes back to the graveyard, he reses from the graveyard, he gets back out in the battlefield, maybe he gets off one frostbolt, and then he explodes again. Wow, great gameplay, right? So that's the other issue, is that they're both long range and hard hitting. If they were long range but they didn't hit hard, which is pretty typical in Classic World of Warcraft, it wouldn't be that bad. If they were still 20-yard range and they hit hard, then only melee has to deal with the drastic increase in DPS. But when they're both long range and they're hard hitting, and on top of that, they're instantly hitting the target, so there's no time for counterplay, no visual indicator that you're about to get absolutely deleted out of existence. It's just the worst thing in the world, right? I could not play a mage in Battlegrounds against an even remotely competent enemy team, because I'm going to be I'm going to go cast some spells, I'm going to explode, and I'm back at the graveyard. And it's great. And what's worse about this is even paladins can't do anything about this, right? The only thing I can do effectively as a paladin is stay around about the 40-yard range mark. Like, literally to stay outside of the instant cast range. Because if I end up going any closer, if I end up going into the 30-yard range mark, they can do the same thing to me. Because there's no visual indicator I'm about to get deleted out of existence. At least Star Surge has the grace of putting a damn star above my head falling from the sky to give me, like, 0.3 seconds of reaction time before I explode. But Shadow Word Death, he's like 5 priests to Shadow Word Death me. Even at the 30-yard, I'm like, I'm going to cast a Holy Light. Boom, I'm back at the graveyard, right? Enemy pushes button, I die, I'm at the graveyard. So it's like, damn. So the point is that it becomes, because they're so hard hitting and they're so instant, there's no counterplay and blah, 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 blah. Anyways, so that's the TLDR. And now I'm going to go through and actually try to proof this stuff. Yeah, 15-minute TLDR. Great job, Pally Time. All right, so now we're actually going to try to proof this stuff really fast here, even though I could probably just end the video here and you get the idea. All right. Actually, I want to pull this up really fast here. Okay, let's check out the classes. Okay, Druid in classic World of Warcraft. What is his long range instant cast spell? Or high damage instant cast spell? Moonfire. Does he even have one? It's a better question. He has Moonfire, which really doesn't count. In Season of Discovery, he has Star Surge and whatever the hell else they give them, which is terrifying, right? Super long range, hard hitting, low cooldown. Cool. What does Hunter have? Hunter has Arcane Shot, and I think he has like multi-shot that he can like do twice. He is like the only class in classic World of Warcraft that actually has long-range, hard-hitting, instant cast spells. Well, in Season of Discovery, I think they gave them even more, like Explosive Shot and a bunch of other things, so they can really blap you out of existence at the 30-yard range. He's the stuff of nightmares probably for squishies at this point, but he already was terrifying. Wait till he gets his ZD trinket. Mages. Did they have any long-range, hard-hitting instant cast spells? No. They have Fire Blast, 20-yard range, 8-second CD, and it tickles you. And literally, it's lucky. Again, it's lucky if it does like 11 or 12% of your life. Generally speaking, her range of damage is like 500 to 600 damage, and if it crits, it's like plus 50%. Whoop-de-doo. In Season of Discovery, they have Laser Beams of Death. They have the ability that like plus 30% increased critical strike, plus 100% increased damage. So very quickly, this Fire Blast is probably hitting you like Earth Shock now. Like it's really hurting. Like super high chance to crit, and when it does crit, it does ×2 damage, which means it's gonna do like crazy amounts of burst damage on you. Terrifying stuff. They have also got their like cone, what is it? Damn it. Icicles fly out of them and they hit you, instantly cast or whatever. So yeah, they got instant cast spells. Enjoy. Paladins, do they have long range instant cast spells in Classic? No, they do not. Do they have them in SoD? Yeah, they actually really do. They can judgment damage you for like 500. Let's at level 60 fully geared. They can judgment damage you for like 500 damage. If it crits, it does ×2 damage. It's actually going to have a pretty high crit chance of like 30% or more. They can do that every 8 seconds. They can then exorcism you every 7.5 seconds. That'll do like 750-ish damage. And then of course, if it crits, it gets like a plus 50% modifier, and it also has a high % chance to crit. So they've actually been given the equivalent of a Shadow Word Death. Speaking of Shadow Word Death, we have Priest. Priest in Classic World of Warcraft have no long-range instant cast abilities whatsoever. The best thing they have is dots. We'll talk about dots in a second. Dots don't really count because they take they essentially have a cooldown associated with them. If the dot lasts 18 seconds, then the dot is essentially an 18-second CD. Spamming the dot into the enemy that won't actually do anything. Even you don't even want to spam Moonfire because you don't get any Moonfire ticks associated with it. It keeps refreshing it and it never ticks, which is really funny. But dots are different because dots don't kill people immediately, so they have plenty of time for counterplay. Like a mage could be dotted up by like 10 warlocks instantaneously, have like 50 dots on him, and he goes neat, and he literally just ice blocks out of it, and he goes on with his life. right? So if you had like 10 warlocks and they could all cast all their dots instantaneously, and they could also instantly cast out a shadow bolt, and there was 10 of them, and a mage stepped forward and he's immediately hit with 20 dots, and immediately there's 10 shadow bolts flying his way. In classic WoW, he would just cock an eyebrow and he'd either hit his shadow reflector trinket, or he would just be like, that's cute, and wait for the shadow bolts to almost hit him, ice block, be immune to everything, remove all the dots, and he would just blink away and run and wonder what the hell he just ran into, right? So there's counterplay associated with dotting up your enemies, and I'll go through that in a second. We're gonna look at all the instant cast spells that they have in Classic versus SoD, and then we're gonna talk about dot and counter dot gameplay. What's the counter gameplay? Because if you notice down here, I say long-range, hard-hitting, instant cast spells equals no counterplay for backline. And that's a big problem. It's the fact that there's no counterplay that is the issue. It's not the fact that the backliners can't be reached out and touched with a bunch of damage on them. It's the fact that there's no time for counterplay, or no option for counterplay whatsoever. It's just, you die now. Enjoy being at the graveyard. Tee-hee, woohoo. Okay, rogues. Do rogues have any long-range instant-cast spells in Classic World of War? No, they do not. In SoD, they kind of still don't, but they can literally throw a rogue at you. They can throw themselves at you. They essentially have, like, charge, so they're just instantly on top of you. And if a rogue can just jump on top of you from, like, 30 yards away, you better believe. I don't even know where Shadow Step is. I can probably try to find it really fast. I'm just like, Jesus. It's probably on boots. Like, why am I even, like, hands, saber strike, mutilate, shiv. I don't even know the range. Shadow step. What's the range on you? It's not actually going to tell me. Yeah, so they just, like, jump on you from, like, 30 yards away. Like, ha! I am on top of you. What was that, by the way? Attempts to step through shadows and appear behind the enemy and increase enemy movement, increase movement speed by 70% for 3 seconds. But what's the range on it? I just know they jump out. They throw a rogue at you. So that's basically their instant cast spells. I throw a rogue at you. So again, imagine 10 rogues in a battleground. The mage wants to step forward and cast some spells at the rogues, and they, like, go invisible, and they jump on him, and they stab him, and he dies. What's the counterplay? Shamans, do they have any long-range instant cast spells in the game? Not to my knowledge. Believe it or not. Not really. They're probably the one class in the game that does not actually have 30-yard range instant cast damaging spells. However, Chain Lightning is so terrifying, and Lava Burst is so terrifying, and Overload is so terrifying that you run into enough shamans, you're going to feel like they do. Like, literally. You'll be like, oh, crud, there's like 3 Chain Lightning casts. Do I run away? Do I stay here? What do I do? So the mage would step forward. He would start trying to do a 2-second Frostbolt casts. 5 enemy shamans would start doing Chain Lightnings at him. They're going to get the Chain Lightnings off before he gets off the Frostbolt. There's a really good chance he explodes. Especially with Overload and everything. But at least there's counterplay because you can see it coming, right? There's at least there's an oh shit moment where you realize everyone is targeting you and they're all casting Chain Lightning. Gee, I wonder who that's for. Be advised. So there's at least some counterplay there. So this isn't that bad in Season of Discovery. Their Earth Shocks and stuff are still 20-yard range. They hit pretty hard. It is what it is. But this is still well within the lines of Classic. Other than she's doing a lot more damage, there's nothing. I have no complaints about this class whatsoever currently. Even though she doesn't currently have the ability to put, like, I push one button, I put 3 dots on enemy team, and my brain's like, what? So that's fun. Warlock. Do Warlocks have any long-range instant cast abilities? I don't know. I think they have, what is it? I think it's Haunt. But that might be the other guys. Haunt. Grimoire, Shadow Flame. Invocation, Master Channeler. I hope they don't give them anything instant. That would be horrifying. I don't think they do, but they're just dotting monsters, right? Haunt, there we go. Unleashes a ghostly soul at the enemy, damage and increased shadow damage. Yeah. I think it's Haunt's about the only thing that they actually have that can reach out and bitch slap someone, but to my knowledge, it doesn't hit all that hard. They're basically just dotting hard-to-kill monsters. So nothing too terribly interesting there, super threatening. But we'll talk about dots in a second, right? Because you can't talk about the life of the 30-yard range guy without talking about dots. Rather than instant cast, hard-hitting instant cast spells in Classic World of Warcraft, they give dots. Like at least because dots at least provide counterplay. All right, Warrior. What's the Warrior's hard-hitting instant cast ability? They have multiple charges and stuff now, and they can get out of stairs, which means that they can really charge on you. So they're on top of you. They bitch slap you with some instant ability stuff. You get away from them. They're right back on you. They hit you again. Warriors actually do kind of have some instant cast stuff, but generally speaking, they're pretty well designed. So the real nightmare fuel is Druid. Hunters are getting even worse. They're just doing what they used to do, but way more terrifying. Mages now are horrifying. Paladins are horrifying, and priests are horrifying. Paladins not so much because there's nothing for them to pair their instant cast spell with. So it's not like they're charging up a smite and then they instant cast spell you and they Kamehameha you. All they can do is blap you for 1,200 damage or about 1,400 damage, give or take. But that still can be annoying if that makes any sense. Yeah, if they have Holy Shock, but Holy Shock only has a 20-yard range. When you start giving them Holy Shock, they actually do have the ability to really smack you around. Pretty good. But that's 20-yard range. That's balance. There's counterplay there, is what I'm saying. You see the Paladin, the Holy Shock Paladins running at you as a mage, or 5 of them are running at you as a mage. Gee, I wonder what's going to happen if you let them get within 20 yards. Maybe I'll just run away from these 5 Paladins and waste their damn time, like counterplay. All right, so let's talk about dots. How do people deal with dots in Classic World of Warcraft? You'll notice that in a lot of duels and a high-level PvP and even like ranking teams, the people who take PvP really seriously in Classic WoW, they never bitch about dots in Classic WoW. It's never like, oh my god, dots are so oppressive, blah, 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 blah. Why is this? Well, it's for a few reasons. How do Druids deal with dots? They dot you up in return, and then they run away super quickly. And then they they out-heal the dots with hots. And then they come back, they go stealth, and they come back in for round 2, right? They literally outrun the problem. They outrun and out-heal the problem. How do hunters deal with dots? Well, the way they deal with it is they can either stay out of range of the dots, because they can actually auto-attack you from like the 40-yard range mark. Most of their abilities are set to be like 36-yard range mark. So they while you're 30 yards away and looking to dot them, they're hovering at like the 36-yard range and pelting you with abilities, right? So they can outrange the dots if they have to. Past 36 yards, you can't even past 30 yards, you can't even grenade people anymore. You can't goblin mortar people anymore. So they're really hard to catch and quite oppressive if they have the world to run around into. This is Classic WoW. In Season of Discovery, nothing's changed. It's literally the same, except now they have more instant cast abilities. So they deal with dots either by being out of range, but even if they do get dotted up, they can become little speedy boys and just outrun it. They usually have quite a fair bit of HP. So they might have to use a healing potion. They might have to use a whippooroo potion to survive being dotted up by an enemy team, but they can usually do it very quickly. If we're talking about group PvP, dots aren't the greatest thing in the world because it gives the enemy team all the time in the world to just heal them. You know what I mean? So they get to ignore them for like 30 seconds because that's how long it's going to take to kill them. Meanwhile, they're killing you, and then it gives like 30 seconds for the healers to get around to healing them. So dots aren't all that scary. What do mages do against dots? Well, like I said before, they just ice block and all the dots go away. That was awesome. They can also ice block and blink. So they're actually blink effectively gives a mage like a plus 20% movement speed. So they can just outrun whatever is dotting them and just be like ice block them away if they have to. They can also counter them pretty decently with their 800 HP shield, because that's on a 30-second cooldown. Like I said, dots usually take about 30 seconds to kill you, so they usually get multiple usage of their 800 HP shield before the dots will actually kill them. Other little tricks I do believe they can do, I could be wrong about this, but I think you can put up an HP shield and bandage yourself and be perfectly fine, which is really interesting, but I could be wrong about that. But yeah, generally speaking, you dot them up. They just like ice block and bounce away. The other nice thing that they have going on is that they actually have 36-yard range on their frost bolts. They can usually get off of rank 1 before the enemy can close the distance and start dotting them up, which means they get to back up again. And there's like a 6-yard barrier between the two of you. It's a very interesting matchup between like Warlock and dotting classes like Priest and Warlock. But at the end of the day, all they have to do is just run away, survive the dots, and sheep stuff and eat and drink. That's basically how they heal. So we got one guy who just runs away and heals himself. Not that big of a deal. We got another guy who stays out of range and or runs away and heals up. He can do that too. We got another guy who can ice block or run away or heal up on the dots. Paladins just cleanse the damn dots and just laugh at the world. Worst case scenario, they bubble or they just heal themselves, one of the two. Priests are one of the dotting classes. They're quite slow, which is one of the reasons why they're allowed to have dots. That means that it's really hard for them to chase people down if other people want to run away. Priests have dispel, so they can always just dispel the dots. They can always just run away in a straight line. And because, much like a paladin, paladins cannot outrun dotting classes, but they can just cleanse them, and so it just neutralizes itself. Priests are the same way. They can't outrun an enemy dotting class, so they just keep getting dotted up over and over again, but they can at least dispel them, and that's basically how these two classes counter it. How do rogues counter it? Well, they have sprint, so they just survive the dots with sprint, and then they go invisible, and then they sap the enemy, and they eat and drink. Or not eat and drink, they just eat and bandage themselves up to full, and then you have a damn rogue on top of you, where your dots now, you bastard, kind of a thing. So that's how rogues deal with it. They just roll their eyes and run away a little bit, and they'll be like, I'll be back in a second, motherfucker. They also have their roundabout ways of healing themselves. How do shamans deal with dots? Well, they're immune to it as long as grounding totem is alive, which is awesome, except for Moonfire. Moonfire will kill the one dot. So that's one way of them dealing with it. They also have cleansing totem, which can cleanse a number of dots. They have poison cleansing capability, which can cleanse a number of dots. But they also have healing capabilities, so they can just heal themselves. Typically, they just don't care about dots. Worst case scenario, they go into Ghost Wolf form and they say later, bitch. And they just run away kind of like a druid would run away. So that's how they deal with dots. Warlocks, how they deal with dots is they just say, come at me, bro. And whatever's dotting them, they'll dot up as well. And they just end up being super tanky. Warlocks basically have the equivalent of like 3 health bars in classic World of Warcraft. They actually have higher standing HP levels than Paladins do, which is kind of terrifying. That's like SL Warlock, like the top tier Warlock kind of deal. So they just kind of ignore the dots until the dots start getting out of hand. Like if it was 1 Warlock versus 3 Warlocks, yeah, it's not a fair fight. He can't really run away from the stuff very well, but what they can do, of course, is use a swiftness potion or use this trinket or that trinket to just speedy zoom away, and that's just how they're going to deal with dots. But typically they don't fear dots at all. They just like, I'll just dot up the entire enemy team and die. And that's just, they just don't care. They could have like an ocean of dots on them, and unless it's not going to kill them before they can dot up the entire enemy team, they usually don't care. So they basically fight fire with fire, kind of a thing. How do warriors deal with dots? They just run away. They have so much standing HP that they can usually just survive getting dotted up. But typically they pair themselves with, like, priests or warriors, and they're just like, so just run back to their healer. The healer will be healing them. The healer will be cleansing them. It's especially effective. So for, like, the Horde team that doesn't have paladins, they might not actually catch cleanses, but at least they can run back to the totems and the shamans who will remove about half the dots from them in the grand scheme of things. But if you're an alliance, all the paladins can just basically, in classic WoW, they have a bunch of free GCDs, which they'll just start cleansing the world with while they're beating the crud out of people, and that's top tier paladin gameplay. All right, flash forward to season of so that's how you deal with dots. Interestingly, that's also how you deal with dots basically in Season of Discovery, right? So dots are nowhere near as oppressive for PvP as hard-hitting instant cast spells that provide no counterplay, or long-range hard-hitting instant cast spells that provide no counterplay. In the 1v1, the hard-hitting instant cast spells are fine, but you start going into group PvP, and it's the stuff of nightmares, because you're like, oh, we took 10 Shadow Priests into Warsong Gulch. We're just going to blow up 2 of the backline every 6 seconds. Lol keck W. Oh, you can't heal us, or you can't... Well, yeah, so anyways, let's talk about classes who are basically on my shit list in Season of Discovery. Druids. Druids are on my shit list because they have both hard-hitting instant cast spells. They can outspeed anybody. You can't slow them. And they can heal while running backwards basically at full speed while beating the crap out of you at the same time, right? So they almost have no weakness whatsoever. The traditional weakness of Druid in Classic World of Warcraft is they can do what I just described, but they'll end up doing it a lot slower, and they're incredibly mana inefficient when they do it. Basically, they just run around and dot people and wait for them to die with dots. But they're not super mana efficient. So anything that can heal themselves, they really, really struggle to kill because of their insane mana efficiency. But you give them Star Surge, which is insanely mana efficient. It's on a low cooldown. It hits like a truck. It's like 40-yard range or something stupid like that, and this class just becomes borderline unkillable, all the hots and stuff they can put on them, right? So they're on my shit list because they have no weaknesses. I'm going to talk about the importance of weakness in your game here in a second, but let's just keep it rolling here. Hunters are not on my shit list. Even though eventually they will be on my shit list. Like, once they get access to their ZG trinket, holy fuck. They don't need a team to delete a mage in the back line. They're going to look sideways at mages, and they're just going to explode. Why? Because they have a bunch of instant cast hard-hitting abilities. On top of, we're giving them even more instant cast hard-hitting abilities like auto attacks, which don't share CDs, to my knowledge, with the other hard-hitting instant cast abilities. They're just going to explodify you. So they're going to get on my shit list eventually, but right now it's perfectly fine. The only thing I don't like about them is they kind of hit like mages. Like, fighting a hunter is like fighting a mage. And I'm like, well, one of your main weaknesses used to be that you had trouble dealing with heavily armored enemies, and now they just don't. And it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. Mages are not super on my shit list, even though we'll talk about them. We'll come back on them. It's specifically Druid, Paladin, and Priest who are on my shit list. Rogues aren't really on my shit list yet. But the fact that they can throw a rogue at you is probably on a bunch of other classes' shit lists, so give them an honorable mention. Shamans aren't quite on my shit list just yet, but they're going to get there. When they start getting like level 60, oh boy. When they get their full talent tree, oh boy. They're going to get there eventually. Warlocks aren't really on my shit list right now. They're pretty fine. Yeah, go ahead and dot the world. I don't really care. Again, dots don't really... They're not tempo enough to not let people play the game, right? There's nothing going on with the Warlock that says you're not allowed to play the game. There is totally stuff going on with Priest and Druid that say you're not allowed to play the game. And eventually Hunter will be on that list. Paladin's on my list because... well, these 3 classes are on my list because all 3 of these classes can effectively heal themselves while running away at full speed, right? Sacred Shield essentially lets Paladin to Flash of Light themselves every 6 seconds. It's like a free Flash of Light worth of healing every 6 seconds. And then if you actually stop to put the Flash of Light yourself, you get a hot on yourself. All right, so Priests can put a bubble shield up and put a hot on them. Druids can just hot themselves. So all 3 of these classes can both run away at full speed, or more importantly, chase somebody down at full speed and be pelting them with instant cast spells the entire way. If I'm making any sense here whatsoever, right? So... and you can't really stop or slow them at all, right? If you try to slow the Priest, he'll dispel it. Try to slow the Paladin, he'll laugh at you. If you try to dot these guys up, they'll laugh at you. Same thing with Druid. They're just going to outspeed you, out-heal you. You can't slow them, all that stuff. So long-range, instant cast spells that do quite a bit of damage, and they can heal while moving full speed. This is going to be really scary stuff. They basically made Paladin able to have a playstyle, which basically makes them a Druid. Except they're a Druid that when you get into melee with them, the situation does not improve at all. And this is kind of also the story for Priest. Priest is one of those classes that it's like, yeah, I can run away from you forever and keep pelting you with spells and dotting you up, but when you catch them, the situation doesn't get any better because they're monsters when they just stand their ground and fight. Depending upon your druid build in Season of Discovery, you might end up with the exact same thing. Chase them, can never catch them, but if you ever do catch them, maybe it gets worse. And Lord knows you don't want to get, nobody and their dog wants to be in melee with a damn Reckoning Paladin. Like, nobody wants to do that. Nobody in Classic World of Warcraft and in Season of Discovery survives going toe-to-toe with Paladins. Nobody ever has, nobody ever will. It just is what it is. Nobody ever, if you don't know this, it's like, if there was a dueling tournament where people basically had to stand still and fight, so like they're in melee range and it's just fight and you can't move out of melee range, a Paladin would easily win that dueling tournament beyond any shadow of a doubt. What's worse is it would only start getting even remotely a fair fight if it was 2v1 under these circumstances. And with 2v1, sometimes the Paladin would win and sometimes he would lose. Like 2 rogues versus a Paladin, my money's on the Paladin. 2 shamans versus a Paladin, maybe they can out-heal his damage and kind of kill him a little bit. But it's going to be a pretty even fight. 2 priests versus a Paladin, the priest will win very easily. 2 mages versus a Paladin, the Paladin's going to actually, that's probably 50-50, but he will definitely kill one of the mages. Nobody wants to be in melee with a Paladin ever. So the fact that they're like pelting you like a druid at range and laughing at you and healing, and you just like, I'm going to close the distance with this Paladin. He's going to delete you out of existence. What are you doing? What else do I want to talk about? All right, the whole weakness thing. So the last thing I want to cover before I end this video is, actually, let me pause the video and I'll be right back, because I want to take this a bit more seriously. All right, well, that took a fair bit longer than I wanted it to. Dogs ended up demanding my attention. All right, we're over here now, I think, right? Still talking about this stuff. All right, I want to talk about the importance of weaknesses in classes. So let me all right, let me preface this, right? Which do you think is more fun of a PvP scenario, right? Where you're playing a class that has strengths and weaknesses, and you're fighting against an enemy class that has strengths and weaknesses, and subsequently you're trying to leverage your strength against the enemy while guarding against your weaknesses, while at the same time you're trying to guard against his strengths and exploit their weaknesses. And of course, they're doing the same thing to you. Why? Because both classes have both strengths and weaknesses. Does that sound like a fun PvP environment? Or does it sound like a fun PvP environment where nobody has any strengths or weaknesses whatsoever? Right? Which one of those scenarios sounds funner to you? In Classic World of Warcraft, every single class has strengths and every single class has weaknesses. All of them do. Okay? It just is what it is. Like, what's the Warlock weakness? They're incredibly immobile. They can't fear you past 20 yards. They really struggle to catch things. So they're super, super scary within about a 30-yard radius, and outside of that, they're just like, no, wait, come back. Right? If you're wondering specifically what Warlock's weakness is, they also really have issues with anything that stacks Shadow Resist on them, and then can also heal themselves. So Shadow Priest starts stacking Shadow Resist, Druids start stacking Shadow Resist, Paladins start stacking Shadow Resist, and Warlocks are just like screaming bloody murder. Same thing with Shamans, because they can heal themselves, right? Every class has weaknesses. Every class has weaknesses, and it's your job to figure out how to exploit them and to guard against your own weaknesses. Now, in Season of Discovery, they've been giving us talents and runes all over the place, which specifically remove our weaknesses. But more specifically, they remove our weaknesses for PvP, and that's where I start drawing the line for bad game design, right? So let's imagine a Blizzard Season of Discovery meeting where you've got 10 people sitting in a room, and they're trying to figure out what runes to give each class, and they ask the rogue player or the paladin player or the druid player what rune they druids would like to have. Like, what rune would druids like to have, druid player? What rune would rogues like to have, rogue player? What rune would paladins like to have, paladin players? And they're going to say stupid things, like bad game design things. They're going to say things that specifically their class would like, but every other class that has to fight them in PvP does not want them to have, right? So, for example, Paladin will be like, oh, I would like a range slow, like Avenger's Shield, for example, because that guards against Paladin's one and only weakness. Paladins are absolute monstrosities in PvP, except they can't really catch anything. They're super, super kiteable, right? Same thing with warriors. Can't really catch anything. Monsters in PvP, their one weakness is kiting. So if you ask Paladin players, like PvPers, what they wanted in a rune, it would be like, fix my one weakness. But we've already established that the game is more interesting PvP-wise when classes have strengths and they have weaknesses. Therefore, it's actually going to be bad game design to fix a class's weaknesses, okay? Let's talk Shadow Priest. What's the weakness of a Shadow Priest in Classic World of Warcraft? They have mana issues. And just like a warlock, they struggle to run people down, right? They're like, no, wait, come back to anything that's actually trying to run away from them. It's pretty much their one and only weakness. And they have extreme mana issues that a number of classes can really take advantage of, especially if they're doing any kind of shadow resist. In Season of Discovery, they completely remove these weaknesses. They have all kinds of ways of getting mana back. Possibly another one of those their weaknesses was being deleted out of existence in a burst or a burst combo from a rogue. They got rid of that, right? But that's not good game design. Okay, Paladin weakness is catching people or chasing people. If somebody is running away from us, what the hell do I do as a Paladin? Can I hit them with any instant cast spells? No, I can't. Can I slow them down and catch up with them without using, like, trinkets and stuff and items in the game? No, I cannot. It's like, no, wait, come back for sudden your Paladin. In Season of Discovery, we can slow the enemy, or we can just keep blasting them with like 200 DPS worth of spells until they either die or stop and heal themselves, in which case you have a Paladin on top of you while you're trying to heal yourself. So they got rid of the weaknesses, which is really, really bad. What was the mage's one weakness in Classic World of Warcraft? Their primary weakness was, they had two main weaknesses. Number one, they weren't all that mana efficient, especially if under pressure. You saw this in very specific matchups like Druid. You saw this in the matchup versus Rogues, versus Shamans. Mages are not that super mana efficient if they can't sheep somebody and get some drinks in. If they're forced to use their blinks and be mobile and ice block and use their fire blasts and cone of cold, their mana efficiency is really bad. Their mana efficiency is only good if they're spamming like Frostbolt and I think Scorch. But their primary weakness is that they cannot heal themselves. This is kind of not true because some of the mages have like, Bubble Shield. So they're technically healing themselves for 800 HP every 30 seconds. But be advised, that's actually terrible. The ice barrier down here, 30-second cooldown. It'll be like 800 HP absorbed. So they don't really heal themselves, which means they're super susceptible to chip damage unless they can sheep and get some eating and drinking in. And then, of course, in Season of Discovery, they were like, what do mage players want? We want to be able to heal. Yeah, good one. So it basically removes their weaknesses, which is, it's a bad PvP game design. Hunter. What was Hunter's weakness in Classic World of Warcraft? Classic WoW. They struggle against heavily armored enemies, and they also struggle against heavily armored enemies that can heal themselves. So specifically, they would struggle against Druid, they would struggle against Paladin, they would struggle against Priest, because Priests are just so damn good at healing that even though they're not, they have so much standing HP, they're kind of hard to burst out of existence. Even though they don't have heavy armor, their healing is so effective and their standing HP is so high that they can even somewhat struggle with them. It's kind of an even fight between a priest and a hunter, believe it or not. And of course, shamans, they're basically wearing plate mail and they can heal themselves. Not super mana efficient under those circumstances. All of those listed classes can cleanse or remove their Viper Sting. That was kind of their only real major weakness. The other weakness, of course, is that they can't heal themselves. Thank God in Season of Discovery they still can't heal themselves, but they gave them so much burst damage now, especially of the magical school variety, that you can see how it's starting to cover their weaknesses. They don't have issues dealing incredible amounts of damage, especially in burst fashion, to heavily armored targets. So you can see that, again, you do not want to remove the weaknesses from classes in PvP. What's going to happen is you're going to make hunters happy and everybody else that has to fight hunters unhappy. You're going to make druids happy when you give them Star Surge and more mana efficiency, but you're going to make everyone who has to fight druids unhappy. And even top tier druid players who know what the hell is going on, you're probably going to piss them off as well, because they're like, whoa, I used to have weaknesses and now I don't. Isn't that bad for PvP? And we're going to be like, yeah, it is. Druids, their only real their two main weaknesses. They had no long-range, hard-hitting spells in the game. Basically, they had 2 dots, and they would just run around in a circle. So if anybody could cleanse those dots, or could just out-heal those dots, or whatever, then it would just it takes a druid a million years to kill anybody, if they want to stay outside of melee range and keep it frisky. Their other major issue is they're not super mana efficient. They're not very mana efficient on the healing. They're not very mana efficient on the DPS. So it was very easy for any healing class to just kind of out-heal them. It's also possible that DPS classes can actually them, because they have to use their mana simultaneously to try to kill the enemy and to simultaneously try to survive the enemy. If you watch any high-level duels versus like Druid and Mage really come to mind, this is where you can see in full display that these two classes actually have mana issues in Classic World of Warcraft, because the Druid's dotting up the Mage, and the Mage is slowly taking chip damage, but the Mage is also putting pressure on the Druid, and so the Druid has to start healing all over the place, blah, 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 blah. It comes down to they both are basically and trying to kill each other. Right, so those were his 2 main weaknesses, but they gave him Star Surge and they gave him a bunch of mana efficiency, so Druid don't have no weakness no more. It's good PvP game design, right? No, it's not. What are we doing? Now, here's where it gets interesting, right? How do I put this? There's no reason to give, what's the reason to get, how do I put this? Some runes have been given to classes for no other reason than to make that class happy in PvP and to cover, to fix one of their weaknesses in PvP. They have no raid usage whatsoever, right? What the hell is Avenger's Shield doing for us under raid conditions in Season of Discovery? Nothing. It's a pure PvP thing that fixes one of their primary weaknesses, which is bad game design, right? What the hell is Star Surge doing for Druid other than helping them in PvP? You could argue that why does it have a 40-yard range for PvE content? My point is that you could have very easily buffed all the classes for PvE while at the same time maintaining existing weaknesses for PvP. So when I see certain runes being given to classes and I know they serve absolutely no purpose whatsoever in PvE context, they're purely there for PvP. And on top of that, I see those runes fixing a glaring hole and a glaring weakness in that class's PvP. I'm going to give it the Palytime seal of disapproval, and I'm going to give it the bad game design seal of approval. It's just terrible. Don't do this. And of course, but of course, the elephant in the room that we talked about at the beginning of the video is that they've been handing out hard-hitting instant cast spells in the game. They've been doing this as if it's retail, and this is not retail. This is Classic World of Warcraft. In retail, one of these hard-hitting instant class spells will maybe take out 5% of your life, because standing HP bars are like 4 to 5 times larger in retail than they are in Classic World of Warcraft. So yeah, these instant class spells will hit you for about 5% of your life, and when I Holy Light myself, it'll heal me for like 10% of my life in retail. In Classic World of Warcraft, those exact same spells, because there's such a smaller pool of HP to play with, those spells are going to hit you for like 30% of your life, 20% of your life, which is ridiculous. And Holy Light heals you for like 40-45% of your life. It's a completely different meta. Do I think that you fix this problem by doubling everyone's HP? If you doubled everyone's HP, you would literally make SoD TBC. In TBC, what they did was they doubled the HP. They took classic World of Warcraft meta. They doubled everyone's HP. They increased DPS by roughly 50%. And they maintained a similar ratio once you have the gear of healing. But essentially, they took the classic WoW meta, decided it was too bursty, and doubled everyone's hit points. What happens in that meta, and honestly, it's actually better than Season of Discovery, but what happens in that meta is rather than people being able to burst stops becoming a thing or a possibility, and you end up having to chip burst people. So you have to, like, do 40% of the target's life and then Kamehameha them with a burst, which is at least a little bit better than what we got going on in Season of Discovery, but it's not ideal. Classic World of Warcraft has an amazing balance between bursting is possible, but it's also counterable. But it depends on RNG. If the burster gets really good RNG, you're going to explode. If the burster gets standard RNG and you gear properly, you're going to survive it no problem. DPS is really high, but the healing is also really high. But if the DPSer gets good RNG, then he'll kill him. So, for example, HP pools are low enough that bursting classes can actually go for a burst, and if they get good RNG, they can expect to kill people. DPS is high enough, and HPS is low enough, healing is low enough, that it's actually worthwhile for a ranged DPSer to cast spells into a paladin who's doing nothing but holy lighting themselves, because if they get good RNG on their spell cast, the paladin can't out-heal that, and he'll just explode. But 80% of the time, the HPS should outpace the DPS, and what ends up, but they have mana efficiency issues. Healing's more mana efficient than the spell casting, so eventually the shaman that's casting lightning bolts will stop casting lightning bolts because he'll go So basically he has, and this is the same thing with mage, right? You have like 2 or 3 RNG rolls to try to kill that healer before you start having mana issues, and the game swings decisively in the healer's favor. So again, that's one of the elements of weakness of mana. Yeah, so it's just classic WoW has an interesting and very good game very good game balance. Season of Discovery is basically pooping all over that, which is fascinating. And honestly, at this point, I would prefer TBC. Like if they literally doubled everyone's HP pool, that would actually make me happier. But when I look at the real issues in TBC, like I can deal with everything else, but one of the real major issues in TBC is too many classes have hard-hitting instant cast spells, which is going to really screw over what group PvP looks like specifically. Maybe you can gear in such ways that you can survive that in the 1v1, but giving people hard-hitting instant cast spells in classic World of Warcraft, this is not TBC where you have twice the HP pool to play with. It's probably not the best idea in the world in general. And then, of course, making them long range just makes it even more nightmare fuel, 20 yards. I didn't even get into why 20-yard range is so good for instant range spells. Number one, it gives the 30-yard rangers time to see what's happening. It'd be like, oh shit, is the shaman running at me? I wonder why the shaman's cast a 1 lightning bolt and is now running at me. Maybe he's running at me because if I stay here, I'm going to eat this fucking lightning bolt and an earth shock at the same goddamn time, and I might just explode. Maybe I should run the fuck away from that shaman, right? There's time to see what's happening. If all of these guys instant cast out Shadow Bolts rather than the Shadow Word Death as it is right now. Let's say the Shadow Word Death was like a slow-moving Skull of Death towards their enemies. At least there would be some counterplay. You could see it coming. The healers could see it coming. The priests could see it coming. They'd be like, oh shit, I need to put a bubble shield on that guy because there's like 5 Shadow Word Deaths moving towards him at the same time. Or he could PvP trinket, or he could use some of the other items in the game like the tailoring boots that reduce damage by 30% for 6 seconds that we had in Phase 1. There's some counterplay involved, right? He gets to be able to go, oh shit, to see his death coming, to see it happening to him, and he at least has time to do something. The healers have time to do something. Everybody has time to do something. When it's 5 enemy players push button and I explode 30 yards away, I'm going to question game design decisions at this point. And I have plenty of time just sitting in a graveyard to wonder who thought this was a good idea. All right, anyway, so I'm going to here and Day Assault Boys, but those are my thoughts on PvP without getting too specific. Yeah, I know you're like an hour-long video and you didn't get too specific. Yeah, I know I didn't get too specific. I'm not even talking about the range stuff. Like why certain Classic World of Warcraft is full of hard cast spells. It's almost impossible for any class to do damage in World of Warcraft without rooting their ass in place in some way, shape, or form and hard casting spells, because instant cast damaging spells do not exist. The only thing that even remotely comes close is dots, right? The reasons for this are numerable, and they don't just stop at the stuff that I've talked about in the video. Part of this has to do with ranges, which rooting yourself in place and needing to hard cast spells makes a very far more interesting meta than I push button and you take damage while I just run around while I just run around laughing at you, kind of a thing. It really hurts melee specifically, but generally speaking, the counterplay to a hard cast meta is I run away, I get yardage on you, and then you cannot. Then the spell bitch slapping stops, right? Because one class has to root themselves in place. I refer to that as chase. Like, you know, how many of these classes in classic World of Warcraft have good chase damage? Meaning the target is running away from full speed, and they can run after it full speed without it using any items or gadgets or gizmos, and they can actually do enough damage to kill them. Druid has really good chase in Classic World of Warcraft. Hunters are the master of chase in Classic World of Warcraft. Mages have kind of sucky chase in Classic WoW. The best they can do is blink forward 20 yards, which allows them to which gets them uncomfortably close to a lot of classes, and get a sheep off and try to burst you. So their chase is medium level decency, but they can't instant cast. Their only instant cast spell tickles, and it's on an 8-second cooldown, and it has a 20-yard range. So they're like blink forward and sheep the guy, which will heal them, and then go for a burst, or blink forward and get one and run after them while fire blasting them every 8 seconds. Not a very good chase, but it's there. Paladins have no chase whatsoever. Their chase is you can't slow me down and I just keep running after you, right? Like no chase whatsoever. They're like, no, wait, come back. What's the chase of a priest? Well, they can dot you up, but if you can get outside of 30-yard range, they can't dot you up anymore. They can't put a lot of dots on you, so you're just slowly dying to one shadow word death. And other than that, they don't have any good chase. They have no movement speed enhancers or anything like that. Rogues have 2 sprints that they can chase after you. They have a lot of CC. They can sap you and stuff. They have decent chase, but once they're out of their 2 sprints, their chase is pretty meh. If they supplement it with all the gadgets and gizmos, they have decent chase in Classic World of Warcraft. But again, there's lots of counterplay to it. Shaman chase is there, but questionable. They can turn into a ghost wolf and move a little bit faster and run after you. So it's there, but they can't really DPS on you while chasing you very well. Because again, Earthshock only has a 20-yard range, and that's getting uncomfortably close to a lot of classes. Warlock has no chase whatsoever. They can put a Curse of Exhaustion on you and slow you down, kind of, sort of, maybe. But then a lot of classes can just remove that, and it's kind of sad. Their chase is pretty bad. Warriors have decent chase because they just can, if they jump on you and get a hamstring, you can call that decent chase. But other than that, they don't have very good chase. So there's not a lot of classes here in Classic World of Warcraft who have decent chase. The moment you start giving them long-range, hard-hitting, instant cast spells on a reasonably short cooldown, every class in the game has chase, which means that running away is no longer the automatically safe thing to do in Classic WoW. Because the enemy just runs after you and keeps pelting you with a hell of a lot of damage while you're trying to run away. And then running at the enemy, of course, as we've seen, becomes significantly more terrifying because everybody and their dog can do the equivalent of lightning bolt. Literally what they'll do is they will shadow word death you, run away a little bit, stop, start casting hard spells into you at a pre-designated time. The melee class finally gets into contact with the enemy caster, and congratulations, you eat a hard cast spell into another shadow word death for your trouble. You've been burst comboed on for the privilege of running after this class. And if you try to run away from the class, you just still get pelted with spells until you fucking die. Kind of sucks. So this is... Season of Discovery is more like a hard-hitting, long-range instant cast meta, which is not ideal for PvP at all. And Classic World of Warcraft is more of a stand-your-ground, hard cast meta, which is much, much, much more interesting and far more dynamic and far more survivable than the other meta. The other meta is fine, and it is the retail meta, but it's only fine if standing HP pools are absolutely massive, right? So, for example, Shadow Word Death is hitting us for like 25% of our life, or 30% of our life. Starfall is hitting you for like 25% of your life. If these spells instead were tickling you, it wouldn't be a problem. But the fact that they're hitting so effing hard, that's the problem. And, of course, when they start hitting super, super hard, they just, enough enemy players push button and they delete somebody out of the game with no counterplay whatsoever. Don't like it, hate it, terrible, awful, no good, blah, 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 blah. So anyways, I'm going to leave it here, and Data's Vault, boys.